Okay, tonight's class is dedicated to Lila Nishmas Bill Abbas Devorah Abraham Cohen. It's appropriate, everything being Ashkacha Pratis, divine providence, that this week the Torah speaks about the first full story of burial, when Abraham acquires the cave of Machpelah in which to bury his wife Sarah. So turns out Hashkacha Pratis, we never had this before, where we have somebody and he was so well attended and so interesting that people asked for him to do a follow-up part two. And we're very appreciative that Rabbi Bergstein agreed. We'll just wait a moment here. It's curious that in the description of the burial of Sarah, it says that Avram came both to eulogize her, I saw, and to mourn for her or to cry for her, V'liv kaisa. So we ask, of course, what is the difference? We've sadly all been to funerals. Curiously, in Chabad, it's customary not to make eulogies so as to not to delay the burial. The eulogies sometimes are done afterwards, or a few words are spoken, or during the Shleishim, or during the Shiva, and so forth. But what is in fact the difference between the concept of mourning and the concept of, the concept of eulogies and the concept of crying that are mentioned separately in the Parsha? So one interpretation is that the eulogy is a sort of intellectual description of the person, a retelling of their identity. And the mourning, or the crying, I should say, is a description of their emotional experience. Okay, so we are honored to have with us Rabbi Bergstein. There he is. Okay.
All right.
Rabbi, I stalled him. We spoke about this week's Parsha being the first story of burial, with Avram acquiring the cave of Machpelah. We're very, very grateful to have you. We never had this before. We've been doing this since Corona started over 2.5 years ago. We've had lots of special and very interesting guests, and we never had a guest that was so interesting that we asked him and he agreed to come and do a follow-up. So we're very appreciative of your taking more of your time, and we will do our best to be respectful. And if people have questions, we'll allow a few minutes for that. So let's start where we sort of left off, but in a certain ironic sense, in the reverse. What are some things that family members should be aware of in advance that they can do or should not do or should be sensitive to or alerted to if they have a loved one who's sort of at the end of their life in this world?
So we spoke about some of the points that are important at the time of passing, or we started, I believe, last week. We spoke about much of pre-planning, if you want to say, points that one should be thinking about as planning, but practical application when it comes to dealing with a loved one who's passing, especially if someone is in a hospital. There are several things that are important to pay attention to, and truthfully, whether someone's in a hospital or it's a sudden death, or even speaking about these things beforehand with our family or loved ones, or putting it in writing, what we want to be done. There are several things that I've come across that a lot of it is probably lack of understanding, appreciation for Jewish tradition, or that it's important that one pay attention to, even if they want to do something that's discussed with the rabbi, to make sure this is in line with Torah law. One of them being is of organ or tissue donation. It's a subject of its own. Don't consider myself qualified to speak about this halachically, what is permissible, what's not permissible, the issues of pulling a plug or brain death are subjects that are detailed, that have to be discussed with a rabbi at the time, whether that's permitted or not permitted. Putting someone on life support can cause more problems than than we want, depending on their circumstances. If it's being debated if they should be put on life support or not. These are issues that one should think about and discuss, or at least have the knowledge that they have to be discussed with. It's not just an emotional issue, but there's many times halachic issues that one has to be concerned about. And some people plan and they want to give an organ, which applies to circumstances where someone, and that's why the term, truthfully, the whole terminology of a brain death was coined for the ability to harvest organs. So it's important to know that it is an issue depending on the organ. These are issues that one should be paying attention to or discussing with the rabbi as they think about it, or if they have a loved one that has these plans, to discuss if this is something that's halachically permissible. Another issue when it comes to, especially if there's a sudden death, it's concerned, sometimes it's automatic, sometimes not, where they will send an individual to the coroner's office for an autopsy. The only time their coroner's office is required by law to do an autopsy, or that they will not bend do an autopsy, is if there's foul play, or if it's a young child, God forbid. If there's concern of foul play, there's no way that they do it. If it's a young child, also there's concern of issues, and it's more difficult to stop them from doing an autopsy. A regular individual, it's something that's discussed with your rabbi. If you should stop the autopsy, in Illinois, I know in Cook County, and I believe it's across the board in all counties, but definitely in Cook County, there's a standard form in any hospital, any ER. I've been in ERs where they have the form available, where you can sign off and sign a waiver that you don't want an autopsy to take place, and they will not send it off to the coroner's office. The hospitals in general, if there's uncertainty of the cause of death, they may call the coroner's office right away, and that's something that one should try to do. Sometimes they can get away with just taking blood, even if they want to, without doing a full incision, a full-fledged autopsy. So those are things that's important to know, that they're not. Halachically, we try not to do it, especially unless it's absolutely necessary by law, that they will not bend on that.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the traditions that we have in the preparation of the deceased for burial? We talked generically about Tara, we talked about the shroud, the simple casket, but can you describe at least just some of the customs, the traditions as to what the process, the Chevra Kadisha, goes through once someone has passed away?
So, in a traditional setting, and I speak of traditional setting because this is the ideal circumstances, and as I mentioned last time, in many communities, this is not the way it is. I mean, here in Chicago, it's not fully this way, but the Chevra Kadisha is available for much of it. Although they are not the ones that are going to come and pick up, the body from a home or from a nursing home or from a hospital, wherever it may be, to actually and take it to the funeral home. The funeral home will either come themselves or they'll hire a livery service to take the body. But the Chevra Kadisha traditionally are involved from before the time of passing. The Chevra Kadisha would be called to come and say vidoy, just come and say the confessional prayers with the individual. So come and say the Shema, be there at the time of passing. There is a tradition.
Let me jump in there for a moment.
Yes.
So let's imagine that a family, God forbid, is with a family member, and ideally would have them say the Shema. What if the person is not in the physical ability to recite the Shema, the vidoy? What should the family do? And if you could maybe talk about those immediate moments right before passing and at the point of passing. And again, and I know it's probably much more detailed, but just to give some people a little bit of a sketch of what they should be looking for, what they could be doing.
So if we're with a family member, with someone, an individual is non-responsive, doesn't have the ability to speak, and as I mentioned last week, there's not when we're told that someone is deathly ill, there's nothing wrong with saying vidui, with saying the confessional prayers with them while they're still capable of speaking.
This is the vidui that we would say in Yom Kippur, the al chaitz, like we say.
Correct,
in Yom
Kippur. And there's several prayers that are said at a time, and those copies are readily available. Some Sidurim may have them, but those are prayers that are readily available. We say the Shema with them. We say the verses that we say at the end of Yom Kippur: Hashem Elokim Baruch Shem Kovod Hashem Malach Hashem Malach. But they're prayers. But the introduction, the opening is that my healing should be is in your hands, and the hope is that God is the healer of all flesh, has the ability to heal an individual. Shall that not happen, so my death should be as a atonement for my sins. And they say the confessional prayers. If someone is not in the state of the ability to say it, one can say it on their behalf. One can say it with them. Sometimes the rabbi will say it. Sometimes during the height of COVID, definitely in New York hospitals, allowing the family members or a rabbi to be present on the phone and say vidui with the individual if they felt that the end was near. So that's important to say the confessional prayers. Is a longer one, and then at the time of passing, as they're passing, we say just Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. Those two verses are said with individual as they pass away, right as they pass away.
Now let's imagine the person has passed. The doctor comes in and pronounces. What are the first things the family should do? Obviously, it's a very emotional time.
Yes.
That they don't have their rabbi with them. What do they do?
All right. So the first thing one should do is it should be a sheet. If they're in the hospital, they're usually covered with a sheet, but cover the body entirely, including the face. We mentioned last week the tradition is that the Chevra Kadisha or someone else that's not a immediate family member will close the eyes. If there isn't anyone, there's no prohibition against a family member. It's a custom that we have that the family member isn't the one that closes the eyes.
For the family member to do it rather than to wait maybe 2 hours or so until.
If it's going to be a period of time, then they can do it. There's nothing. The process is very much one of custom, and it's Jewish custom and tradition we follow. So it's not a halacha that it's a law that it has to be this exact way, and otherwise it's a sin. It's custom, this meaning because it's painful for the family, painful for the one who passed away. That's why we don't look. One of the reasons why we don't look at the one who deceased. We cover them up. We cover their face.
So once he's covered, you're not going to uncover the body.
Correct.
That's another factor.
Now, and which includes, I should say, this includes also the common American practice of a viewing.
So that's not permitted in time.
Not permitted. The only item that we are permitted to do, and I should say not just permitted, but we should be obligated to do, is a family member to identify before the funeral that this is actually the loved one that they're burying. As the Chevra Kadisha, when a body comes in, especially as a hospital, and they have a wristband, we'll cross-reference the name on the wristband and the name on the Tahara sheet, because we want to make sure. There's a story that's told of the Chevra Kadisha in New York get a call from a nursing home. An individual passed away. The family was notified that their mother had passed away in the nursing home. The Chevra Kadisha comes and picks up the individual. The tahara is done. Everything's prepared. There's a funeral, and the family sitting shiva. And the second, third day of shiva, the phone rings, and it's the mother on the phone asking, "Why haven't you called me in 3 days?" As it turned out, there was another woman with the same name that had no family. So there have been other instances where a tahara was performed on the wrong individual, and they almost buried the wrong individual in the wrong grave. So it's a common practice to allow for a family member to view the individual. We do not perform a viewing. It's not a show. It's painful for the family, and it's painful for the deceased to be.
Now, can you describe some of the processes, as much, just in brief, that are the traditions, as you mentioned, and customs of the tahara, besides literally washing the body? What are some of the other practices that occur in the funeral home, preparing the person for burial?
Before I forget, I just want to take one step back.
Sure.
Step back to the at the time of passing. There's a tradition that we open the windows in the room, or a window, at least a window in the room. I know sometimes in a hospital it may be difficult. There may not be a window that can be opened, but at the time of passing, when the soul departs, we open the window. Tradition open the window. We also pour out any open water that's in the house.
In the whole house, or only in the room where the deceased?
I believe it's in the entire house, but I would have to double check on that. But I believe the
well, I'm assuming if a person's in a hospital, we're just talking about in their room,
right? But obviously when you have to.
And just to add another point, sometimes when the people are waiting with the body, they should not eat in the room where the deceased is.
We also don't discuss anything about death in front of the person when they're in the process of dying.
Funeral plans is retained. So if you have to talk about things, go in the hall and tell the person we're going outside. So now the time has come. The person has passed. We spilled out the liquids. We've opened the window. The Chevra Kadisha or whoever it is comes, arrives. The deceased is brought to the funeral home. Can you give us just a couple of the
process
customs?
Of the tahara is one of literally the tahara is purification, and that's what it is. The body is washed just like a baby is washed when it comes out of its mother's womb. When it comes into this world, it's washed. So too, the body is washed as it leaves this world. As the life leaves this world. We wash the body with warm water to clean it. We make sure that there's anything on the body that is attached to the body, whether it's even nail polish, or if it's adhesive of a bandage, or bandages in general, unless we're talking about bandages covering over an open wound, large open wound. A lot of great care is taken for respect of the body. The body in general is kept covered as much as possible throughout the process. Definitely the face and the private areas are covered throughout, except with the exception of when the entire body is being washed or being put in the mikveh. Out of respect for the body, respect for the deceased. Everything is done with great respect, great honor, great dignity. And
just as how many people are involved in the washing?
So in general, a tahara is performed by 3 or 4 people.
Do you ever run out? Do you ever have a shortage of people? Has that ever happened?
Unfortunately, yes. Depending on the circumstance, depends on where. Some there are times where we've had 2, 3 taharas in one night, and sometimes we've had taharas and have to run from one funeral home to another funeral home to take care of it, taharas. And unfortunately, I'm not going to say. Unfortunately, not everyone requests a tahara. So when you have multiple taharas, in a sense, it's a blessing because you know that they're being cared for in the proper halachic fashion.
Well, this is an important note you mentioned. I think we touched on this, but to repeat, I mean, here in Chicago, and we're not promoting one funeral home over another, is it generally true that any of the funeral homes can do a tahara and so forth? And so we're not promoting one over another, but it must be requested. Don't assume, Rabbi, correct me if I'm wrong here, don't assume that just because you called a, quote, Jewish funeral home, that they will by default perform and adhere to all of the customs. Those need to be enunciated, including the shomer, and there's an expense there, the tahara, as we talked about, and so on. The family has to specifically request those. Don't assume that, well, they're a Jewish funeral home, of course they're going to do everything properly. They're capable of doing it, but it must be requested. Can you nuance that out? Is there anything that I'm missing with that?
No, I mean every single part of it. I touched upon this last week as well. We are working on a Chabad package in the sense where you would call the funeral homes, working starting with Chicago Jewish, call them and say, my loved one passed away, I want the Chabad package. So automatically that will include a tahara, a shomer, a tachrichim, a simple pine casket. The one thing that you want to supply, you should supply, if it's a male individual, is their talis.
And if you have a problem with that, there are shuls, even you have talisim that are sort of older. That are
the talisim that the funeral home supplies are, I would not call it talis. They're the silk Zion talis scarves. And if you have a talis or your loved one has a talis, especially a large talis, if not, as Rabbi Epstein said, every shul or many shuls have old talisim that are not kosher, but they're holding a supply for whatever it is for various reasons.
So is it correct that the preference is that the person be buried in their talis if they have?
There is actually a custom. There's some that have a custom that if the individual didn't have their own talis, they get buried without a talis. Mm-hmm. But in Chicago in general, if this talis family does not supply a talis, the funeral home will supply a Zion talis. But I'm hoping that with the Chabad package, if they don't have, if a family doesn't have, the deceased doesn't have their own talis, that they should at least request the family to get a talis, a larger talis from the rabbi to make sure that the proper talis is being used. But asking a funeral home is the shomer, the tachrichim, the simple pine casket, a tahara. Those are the basics that you want to make sure that they know you want.
Now, what do we say about a person? I'm sorry, say that last time.
A bottomless vault, or what they call the Orthodox vault.
Okay, and all the cemeteries in Chicago, the Jewish cemeteries, can accommodate that. Shalom.
Yeah, it's a matter. They can all accommodate it if they want. If you're requesting the man,
scream a little.
They don't. They in general, they don't have a supply of a never-ending supply of caskets or vaults just sitting around. I've been at funerals. I was once doing a funeral. The height of it was a bitter cold day. It was a lot of snow on the ground, and I was standing in the cemetery waiting for the truck to bring the vault because it got stuck in a snowbank in another cemetery. So they know they have to. They have their funeral. They'll call the casket, the vault company, and tell them, okay, I need a vault. By this time. On this particular day. The challenge is, if we should try to do whatever we can that the funeral should be as soon as possible, if at all possible, the same day. But there are many conditions and many things that, I guess, again, you just discuss with your rabbi what should be done, whether something should be postponed. We don't postpone it just because we're on vacation in the Bahamas and it's inconvenient for us to change our ticket. But there, as I mentioned before, a lot of the entire process is based upon the principle of kavod hamet, having respect for the deceased. And if kavod hamet means that there are more people there or another child can make it in, then waiting a day may be kavod hamet.
Okay, we're going to just hold the rabbi for a few more minutes, but if people want to jump in and unmute and ask a real short, brief question, we'll be happy to do our best to answer it. But just if anybody wants to jump in, just nice and brief and to the point, would be most appreciated. Can you give us a sense, Rabbi, of what the Torah process includes? That is sort of the traditions, or is there a reading that is done? Is there prayers that are said? Like,
there are
just
several
what
verses,
goes on?
Several verses, several prayers that are said throughout the process. One in the beginning, it's asking God for forgiveness on behalf of the individual. It's a process of praying for the soul, and asking God for forgiveness on behalf of the soul. I once had a rabbi who wanted to be in it. He was never in a tahara room, and it was a close member. So he wanted to be there and experience it. And he told me after, he says, I wish everyone would know the meaning of these prayers. These prayers are said, and how meaningful and special the prayers and the verses that are recited. That more people would demand and request a tahara. So,
what is there any leeway if somebody says, I want to be buried in a suit, I want to be buried with my drums, I want to be buried with a prayer book? Do we have any tolerance for that, or do we tell them no, absolutely not? Okay, so we'll skip that question. Speak to your
I'll touch upon one aspect that you mentioned about putting, the reason the Talmud tells us why shrouds were established, and the shrouds are the same, plain, simple white shrouds for everyone. We all go out the same way. Everyone is equal at that point in life, and no one, there's no status there. So we don't put anything inside that's unrelated directly to the individual. We may put inside the casket pieces of sheet, pieces of clothing that may have blood on them, but we don't put anything in there besides for that. Not a special sitter or so on. There's some people, will bury in, while they're burying someone, they'll put inside the cave or inside the grave as well some shemus, some geniza, but not something specific. Oh, they want to hold on to their siddur that they prayed with every day. They want to make sure they have that with them. We don't put even not a cell phone or a siddur.
So I've been in places that they actually put gniza around the perimeter of. I'm not even
sure. That's a blessing. Once you're doing one.
So can you do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Do you need to request it? Do you need to write it anywhere? Do you need to? Or they
if you want to put it in writing and tell the rabbi that you want to be buried with geniza, the cemeteries won't mind it because it's less geniza they have to worry about when it's being delivered there. It's an honor for the individual that they're buried with geniza. But it's not in the casket. We put it around the casket.
Just to end with a quick story, there was the famous wealthy man, the Rothschild family, and when he died, they read in his will that he wanted to be buried with his socks on. So they went to the Chevra Kadisha and they said no. A week later, they were reading his will, and he said, by now you know that even a Rothschild isn't buried with his socks. So you think he's the wealthy guy, but as the rabbi said, when that time comes, everybody is the same. Okay, Rabbi Bergstein, I really, really want to thank you for doing this double duty. It's been very, very informative, and we should be zeicha that it should only be discussed and not have to be implemented, because we should merit the time of ubila hamavas lanetzach, death is swallowed up for all eternity. And we should only be able to talk about happy and joyous things, but we so appreciate what you do for the community. We so appreciate the time, double, that you took to help explain some of these halachas and some of these traditions and some of the conceptual idea of how Torah helps us at the ultimate passing. Okay, everyone, tomorrow night, we'll learn some Maimer programming note. I will not be here Thursday, off to the Kinnis HaShluchim. And hopefully I'll have some reports for you about that when I return. Good night, everybody, and thank you all. I'll send out the recording.